I'm going to start in just a second. Just checking that you guys can all hear me and it's not super loud, because I've got my camera right next to my face, so so you can see what I'm doing as best as possible. So if it's too loud or whatever, just let me know. And in this way, I can also see the comments, which is great. So if you've got any questions as we go through, then obviously you just pop them into the chat and I'll see if I can do my best to answer them. But today we're going to be looking at basing techniques and some of the things that we... Thanks, Alice. So we're going to be doing some basic basing techniques that I kind of use as my go-tos. And I think that a lot of these are strategies that are not going to be new to people, but potentially things that just little tips and tricks, I think, that will probably just help you just to level it up a little bit. So I've got some examples I want to try to get to today. You will have seen some of these guys on my Instagram. So I've got this guy, Stekscalemodels. I spent some time on this guy because I wanted his base to be really effective and to raise him up from the others on the battlefield, just to kind of set him apart. Hi, James. It's got to be the owls, isn't it? It's got to be the owls. So I'm obviously... I'll probably be preaching to the converted on most of these things, but I want to talk you through kind of how I construct the base on this, go through my snow technique, and also give you a few of the ideas that kind of build the story behind the base, especially for these slightly larger miniatures. Likewise, I'll go for something a little bit simpler as well. So the classic urban base, I'll give you my take on this. These are so easy to do, and you know, people put those like tutorials and stuff out which are really helpful, and I think a lot of people are a little bit scared of just doing it because it's the extra work, but it's so worth it. And I hope you'll agree that it does kind of elevate the model and just make it, well, just look really cool. So one more that I'm going to show you is this is from a recent commission, and just did a really basic base here. But we're going to go for a Martian theme on this guy, and I'll try to build it up for you so you can see those three sort of ideas. So what I want to do first of all is to look at the Martian base. I'll show you how I use my own sort of style of pigments, and then go to the urban base, and then I'll finally go to the snow base as well. So yeah, if any of those interest you, then well, let's get to it. So the first thing that I want to do is show you the Martian base. So this is probably the easiest thing that you can ever do. Loads of people do it, and it just kind of sets your models apart really from the standard kind of grey dull bases. So this is a really straightforward technique really. What we've got here is fine sand, which has been glued to the plain base using PVA glue. So I'm not gonna kind of teach you how to suck eggs on that one. Fine sand is really good, because the actual grain size itself is small enough that it suits the scale that we're working at. But you can use coarser sand as well, depending on what you want to do. But the key with the Martian base is to keep it fairly simple. You know, if you think about the surface of Mars, where you have that kind of red planet kind of vibe, you're not going to have loads and loads of boulders everywhere. And it's a really good base for drawing attention to the miniature itself, rather than making the story kind of move to the base, rather than focusing on the chap on the top there, or chapette. So for example, you might have seen recently I did a Lazarus on a Martian base. Pretty straightforward, because he's a cool guy and he looks really neat on top of it, and I wanted the attention to be right on him. So in order to do our Martian base, all we're going to do is we're going to take our standard black base and then apply PVA glue and then dip it in our sand. Pretty straightforward. I like to use the Warworld Scenic stuff here. You can get other fast tack glues, but this stuff is really good. It tends to be used for application of static grass, but it's really good because it dries really fast, or at least it gets tacky really quickly. So I'm pretty impatient, so I like to be able to crack on as fast as I can. So just drizzle that on there, simple, spread it around, and then dip the sand on. Within, I don't know, 5 minutes, it will be dry. The next thing I've done here is I've taken Vallejo air. I like the air because it's a bit thinner, so it applies to the base really nicely with a paintbrush. I use an airbrush because it's just quicker, but you can use it with a paintbrush too. any colour goes, really. There's no one set colour for a Martian base. You know, if you have a red planet, well, you know, it's your imagination. It can be whatever you like. So with this rust, I use it straight out of the little pot. But sometimes you can add a little bit of red in there. Sometimes you can add a little bit of black in there, just depending on what kind of vibe you want. So that's been applied onto this. You can see I've got a bit of overspray here, but you can see that's the original colour. And then it's just had a Nuln Oil wash straight over the top, just to kind of bring out a little bit of the texture in there. Got a little bit of something in there. So the classic thing to do here is to dry brush it, right? So what we're going to do is we are going to dry brush it, but we're going to take it a step further than that. So when we're dry brushing, we want to have a fairly thick paint. If you use one of the model air paints or you use a thinner paint, then obviously you're just going to repaint it. That's, you know, that kind of is not the point. So what we're going to do is we're going to take just a little bit of white. This isn't going to take too long. Okay, I know you can dry brush, but just so you can see what I'm doing, I'm just taking a little bit of that white. I'm going to take a larger brush. I've got some of these cheap brushes. You can see that the bristles aren't that great. It's kind of a bit matted at the bottom, but these are really good for dry brushing, I think, especially on scenery, because they got a little bit more to them, rather than the kind of makeup brush style. So we're going to take our little brush here. I'm going to add a little bit of the original colour into the white, because with dry brushing you want to make sure that it's kind of subtle, because otherwise it can be totally overwhelming and then that kind of ruins your miniature. And don't forget, with this base, we don't want to draw the attention away from the miniature. We want to complement it. So what I'm going to do, this is the thicker paint here with the white. I've got a slightly runnier red. I'm just going to take a little bit of that red, because of course the dark pigment will really come into its own with the white here. You can see how much white it requires to kind of get it back to that consistency, or that colour. So with this dry brush, you don't need to go, oh, I've got a bit much there, never mind. Happy accident, as Bob Ross says. So with this technique, you can wipe some off. But to be honest, because it's a base, I'm not doing it onto a miniature. I don't care that much, frankly. So I'm just going to go straight onto it, straight onto the base here. You can see that we're picking up all of the highlights there. And that's it. I'm not going to go over the top. I'm trying to get it into focus for you. Okay, I'm not going to go over the top with it. Now, a lot of people would do that with a darker red colour to really push the Martian base theme, and that's absolutely fine. But I'm going to now show you something that you might find useful, rather than just teaching you how to dry brush. So lots of people use expensive pigments. I don't like to spend money unless it is on something that I really value, as I think a lot of you will probably agree. So I like to use these chalk pastels, if I can get the box open. So the chalk pastels are great because you can actually shave them off. They last forever. You can shave them off. You can make your own coloured pigments pretty easily. And these kind of things are so useful because the applications are almost innumerable. You can just always use them for loads of different things. So I just grab the colour that I want. I'm going to grab my my hobby knife so that I can scrape it off. Now, because of the colour, we want probably a browny red, don't we? So we're going to use the brown, shave that off here. It's really straightforward. You can see how much you can get off there, and it stays around forever. And then we're going to want to put some red in here too. So we're going to take some of this red, we're going to add that into the mix, like this, like so. Now I'm going to take a really old brush. I've actually taken the top of this brush off so that we're basically left with this horrible remnants, which for anything else would be totally useless. But for us right now, it's perfect because we can bash it around. I was watching MJG Paints earlier on his weathering tutorial. He's got that hardy brush that is not any good for anything else, but still you can bash it around. Doesn't matter if any of the bristles come off. It's it's totally useful for dirty jobs. So we're just going to smush this around as best we can to create a reddy Martian sort of colour. I don't know if you can see this from here. And we're just going to take some on the brush. We'll load up the brush as much as we can, trying to get that into focus for you. And then we're just going to go for it on the base. Okay, we're just going to push it all over the base, and you'll see how how much of a lovely powdery colour we get on there. I'm hoping you can see that. So this is such a straightforward way to level up that base. You know, we left it with a dry brush and it looked good, but let's be honest, now we've got a kind of basically a cheap pigment that we've used here in the chalk pastels, and we've made it look so much more realistic because we've added a fine dust to it like there would be on that Martian base. So this is, I mean, I can't recommend this enough because it saves you a fortune on pigments. I know that some of you might have your favourite pigments that you like to use, but for me, if it's cheap, it does the job, then brilliant, we'll be spot on. So there we go. That is quite simple. Obviously, it looks a bit raggedy because we haven't blackened the edge, but you trim that with black and that's going to look the business. Now, to show you, obviously, with some of you will assemble your miniatures and put the miniatures straight on to the base already. So don't be afraid to get some of that on the shoes of this marine here. So I'm going to go in with it. Just going to go for it with my pigment. I'm trying to pick out the cracks in there so that it doesn't just lie everywhere on the base. We still get that nice grey. But what we can do is we can actually go up onto the shoes here. We can push that around. And what we're going to get is that lovely dusty finish that you see all of those, you know, top Instagram posts getting, or whatever social media is your choice. And you can take that as far up the miniature as you like. You know, if you want them to be really dirty, then you take them up to the knee, up to the waist. If you want them to be fairly clean, then you just do the base itself and just leave it there. While we're here, I also wanted to show you this pipe. I don't know if you can see it, but the pipe has taken this reddy colour and it looks really rusted. So once again, you've got a different application that you could use this for if you wanted to use kind of, if you wanted to get that rusty effect quite quickly. You know, I first learnt this because I did a commission for a guy in the Royal Wessex Yeomanry, and he was a Challenger 2 tank driver, and his brother wanted him to have a diorama of these two tanks. So I did a broken down chieftain on Salisbury Plain. And the whole thing was coated in this. You know, I used the fine sands. I know that James was talking about this earlier in his weathering. You know, using this applied onto the side of a tank is going to give you a wonderful texture. And, you know, you spray that in this same sort of Martian colour, apply this same sort of process onto the side of it, and it looks absolutely spot on for rust. So, you know, there are loads of applications for this, and it was definitely a tip that I would encourage you to try out because it's so cheap. Yeah, in the UK, I think this pack of chalk pastels cost maybe £2, £3 from like, what's it called, Hobbycraft or something like that. Some cheap kind of shop that you can get it from. So I hope you find that one useful. And we're going to park the idea. If you've got any questions, now would be a good time to ask. Obviously, you can see the different colours in here. You could use it to make kind of a green mossy colour on the side of a rock. You could darken your base with kind of soot and ash with black. You could even use white to give yourself a really eerie kind of ashen colour. But obviously, we're using our imaginations with the basing. You know, you can take it absolutely anywhere that you like. I can imagine this would be really good on orc vehicles, for example. If you use the hairspray chipping technique, if you add some texture underneath there, and then rub away the top of that paintwork, and then use this, you know, that's going to be a recipe for success. And you're going to have really quick painting techniques that are going to make your army stand out on the tabletop. I mean, I'm just looking at this guy over here right now, and straight away, like, his base has been absolutely leveled up by, let me move the light, just by adding that. That's simple process. So that is that one done. I'm going to park this one to one side. We're going to move on to looking at the urban base. Now, the urban base is quite a straightforward idea, but it does sometimes take a little bit to kind of get together. So let me just get my ducks in a row, so to speak. No ducks were harmed in the making of this live stream, I promise you. Right. we want to create an urban environment similar to this. Obviously, you can add snow if you want to. It's just because I've done Space Wolves. But we want to create this urban environment where this kind of tarmac or rubble has been, well, essentially broken up. Only bar costs. So fixing pigments is super easy. I would recommend that you always seal your miniatures using a spray, either from a can or from an airbrush. I like to use a satin varnish. On all the commission work that I do, I always use satin varnish because it kind of gives that classic nice finish. But what I would really encourage people to do on their own models, satin varnish the figure so it looks really nice and shiny and kind of really top quality. But then use a matte varnish on the actual base. So if you look around, in a natural environment, things like this tarmac's not going to be particularly shiny, especially if it's covered in dust and debris. So a matte finish on there is going to really tidy it up. But that is a great question. Hi Murky, how are you doing? Thanks for joining us. So, right, this is like my little secret that I'm going to share with you, and it's just the best thing that I ever found. I kind of, you know, as a hobbyist, you just kind of use whatever you can find. So I stumbled upon this, and I've never gone back. And I would urge you to use this material for what I'm going to show you in a moment. So in this mug, I have a powder, and this is tile adhesive. Okay, so tile adhesive is brilliant for so many reasons. Firstly, it's a really, really fine powder, so you can see in there, it's such a fine powder. Secondly, it's designed to dry fast and really hard. So if you are actually tiling, then obviously you don't want your tiles to be falling off the wall. You want them to stick on the side of a wall and then, have the time to adhere and for the adhesive to set. So this stuff is brilliant because, as I said earlier, I like to work fairly quickly. I don't have time to wait for loads of things to dry. So this is absolutely spot on. The third benefit of tile adhesive is that you can mix it yourself to a certain consistency depending on what you need it for. So I'm going to kind of demonstrate this to you in this little cup thing. We're going to take a decent chunk of tile adhesive here. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to use some water and use this pipette. If you don't have pipettes yet as a hobbyist, you need to get them. They're literally life-changing. They're so good. We're just going to take some water. I'm going to drop that into the mix. I've got some stirrers, some plastic clay tools that you can use just to mix it around. But what you're going to see is it turns into a completely different kind of consistency. So right now, it's too dry for our purpose. But what you can do is you can leave this to dry, and then you can actually smash it up. And what it will do is it will break into little boulders, and there you've got basically free rubble for your bases or for your scenery or whatever you need to do. So this is really good. I just honestly, I can't rate this highly enough. We're going to add a bit more water in here. We might need to kind of add a bit more of the tile adhesive into the mix, depending on what we're going for. So now we're getting into kind of, this is probably the consistency that we would use. We're probably a little bit too wet maybe. So this consistency here, and even slightly wetter, is actually going to dry smooth. And that's designed, I'm assuming, for its purpose as a tile adhesive, that you have, if it's a wet mix, then obviously you can use that amongst the tiles wherever you're about to grout, and it's going to give you a kind of a smooth finish, so it'll fit in. I don't know, I'm not a tiler, I'm just guessing. But obviously that can have purposes in itself. So if you allow this to set, it will be a smooth mass that then you can colour and pigment however you need to. And then that is going to, in turn, give you a nice kind of eerie, sort of smooth finish to whatever it is you're going to do. So it might be that you're going to do a Nurgle base and you want just like a pool of smooth liquid. Well, use this, allow it to kind of set smooth, and then paint it and then cover it with a gloss varnish. There you go. For us though, we're going to add a little bit more, just a touch more tile adhesive onto there. I'm just going to mix that in so we just get a slightly thicker mix again. Just a slightly thicker mix. Here we go. Now the slightly thicker mix is good for us because when it dries it has texture, unlike the wetter mix that dries smooth. Okay, so obviously all those dry brush fans out there, you're going to want to have it with texture so that therefore you can kind of you can use that for your dry brushing and it's going to stand out. So we're going to take our base, okay, and we're going to apply some of this tile adhesive onto the base. I'm not going to do it just yet because the next thing we're going to do is going to talk about cork. Now if you don't have a massive roll of cork like this, you need to get one. They're super cheap and you get them on Amazon, and the uses for it are just, I mean, there's millions of different uses for it. I use it all the time for rubble and tarmac, but I've also used it for ice. You can use it for like cracked earth. So for example, if you tear it up and then put it back together fairly closely, you can have cracks in the earth. It's also really good. My favourite thing to do though is to connect pieces together onto the base to give a bit of a story behind each one of those bases. So for example, on this guy, what we've done is I've taken 2 bits of this cork here and I've connected it with wire. You might just be able to make out the wire there, seeing if it's in focus. So the wire actually goes straight through this piece into the other piece and it connects the 2 of them. It adds a bit of durability to it, and it just looks cool, to be honest. It adds a bit of variety. So the other thing that I would recommend you get, not just cork, is garden wire. So this garden wire is really useful, not only because it provides wire that you can connect cork, but when you strip it, so we're just going to take this, wrap our snippers around it, and we can just pull it off, he says. There we go, so we just pull that off. And what we have here is actually a pipe. Don't know if you can just about see that. So what we can do is we can shove that into our tile adhesive when we get to it and use that as extra interest. So I'm just going to take this, I'm going to take a moment to take some of this off, get a few pipes off there, get another nice bit of metal rod, pop that to one side, take a drink of water before I choke. Okay, ready to go. So we're going to take these tiny little rods of metal and we're going to put them into the cork. Okay, we're going to do this in such a way that, you know, we might have to dry fit this, so to speak, to kind of see how they're going to go together. So you might want to kind of guess the best sort of pattern for this. So that might be quite cool on the angle, might be quite cool on the side there. Or it might be easier if your miniature needs it, just to have it like this so you've got space. So you can have a foot over here and a foot over here. So you can kind of do it that way. I've learnt the hard way, don't do this with your fingers because it bloody hurts. So we're going to take our tweezers, or our snippers, we're just going to push that into the cork. Okay, you can see how it's just gone in there nice and easily. I'm going to take our other piece and we're going to put that in as well. And this kind of gives the impression of rebar, that sort of thing. Really straightforward technique, but obviously it makes a huge difference. Now the only thing that's difficult here is getting these 2 on. So use your snippers or your tweezers. I use snippers because you can hold it and it's going to dig into the metal, so it's not going to slip. And then we're just going to use that and kind of push it into the cork as best we can. Kind of improvise here. We're going to push that into roughly the right spot and then see from there how we're going to go. All right, that's done. That actually wasn't too difficult. What we can do then, we can bend it. We can give it a little bit of, you know, variation. Like with this guy here, we've got it kind of just sticking up a little bit. So now we've done that, we can get to the exciting bit, he says. So we're going to take our tile adhesive. We're going to slap it on liberally onto our base. Okay, we're going to pop this all over the base, just like so. We're going to pull it to the edges where we can, because obviously that saves us a job once we've got the cork in the way. We're going to move it to the edges like this. And then we are going to plonk our cork onto the top like this. I'm going to push it down Okay, what you'll notice is that obviously the tile adhesive will want to come back through between the cork. So what you might need to do is get your hobby knife in there and just kind of scoop some of that excess out. Okay, you can just apply it there and just wipe that excess off. I'm not going to go into too much depth with that. Obviously you can make your own judgment if you come to use it. And then we can use our tool. This could be a brush, it could be a tweezers, it could be a cocktail stick. And we're just going to dab the outside just to rough it up a little bit. Like this. Do you see how the texture's changed there? Just by rubbing it out a bit. So we're going to do that all the way around. Just like so. If there's a bit of excess, we can wipe that off. Like there. Add that all the way around. Now at this stage, I would recommend you just leave it. Just let it dry. And through trial and error, you will see when it's going to dry smooth or when it's going to dry with texture. If you're worried about it though, you can always sprinkle some of that fine sand on top of it. Okay, and that would be absolutely brilliant. You could leave it there. But of course, when we use the wire, we got some free pipes. So everyone loves a free pipe. So we're going to shove that in there. We're going to shove that one. Let's say there's a broken water main underneath this crack. So they're all kind of sticking up. We're going to use our little tool there just to embed them. Like so. And that is it. We're going to leave that to dry. And you'll be left with obviously this, but dried version. You can then paint this however you like. I've got a demonstrator which we'll go through in a moment. But what I would recommend is you use a fairly thick layer of primer, but don't brush it on too thick so that you lose the texture in the cork, because that's obviously quite a natural tarmac sort of texture, which is really good. So you don't want to lose that. So it's worth kind of bearing that in mind. With that said, getting the primer into the side of the cork can be a bit tricky, but I would urge you not to panic, because once you have kind of primed it, you can then coat it in whatever base colours you want. I'll show you mine in a moment. And then you just give it a liberal coating of a dark wash, such as Nuln Oil, or you could literally just water down your black acrylic paint and just coat it. Because it's a base, it doesn't matter if the paint pigment separates. It's not a problem. You're not going to lose anything from it. So it's worth kind of just experimenting with that technique there. Obviously at this point, now that this is nice and wet, you could obviously put anything you want into it. So if you've got some objects, skulls, things like that you want to put in, then you can do. You can also buy the replica razor wire, which is quite good. So mine's an absolute tangled mess now, but that's obviously quite a cool thing. So you can obviously wrap it around a paintbrush handle to get that lovely spiral effect, and then shove it in there. And because the tile adhesive is soft, it will embed really nicely into your scene. And once again, it adds story to the base of your model. So I'm going to pop this to one side, get rid of all of this grubbiness. Pop that to one side. Pop him away. And I'm going to take an example that I've made earlier, okay? In proper Blue Peter fashion, here's one I made earlier. So I've just gone for a Vallejo grey on the tarmac areas. And then on this one, I wanted to have a bit of a kind of mouldy, greeny brown colour. So I went for Russian Tan by Vallejo in the Model Air range. And I like the viscosity of these because it applies to bases really nicely. You don't have to water them down, you can just take them straight. They also obviously run through the airbrush nicely, which is how I did this for speed. You probably won't be able to see this in the video, but I've painted the metal rebar in Vallejo Rust, and then I've painted the pipes in Vallejo Gunship Green. I always think pipes look good in green. I don't know why. I just do. So what we're going to do, I'm going to do very much the same thing. We're going to dry brush the top of this just to bring out the features, and then I'm going to take you through the next sort of steps. So we've got a grey, so we need to dry brush in a lighter grey. So I'm actually going to go for Vallejo's Game Colour Stonewall Grey on this one. I really like the Game Colour range. when I moved from scale models to fantasy miniatures and Warhammer, etc. Just because they're a bit thicker, so they get really good coverage. Whereas with scale models, you tend to do a lot of things through the airbrush. So the air colours worked really well for that purpose. So just give it a good shake. I'm going to get it onto my tile here. Now this grey might be a little bit light, but we're just going to go for it just for the sake of the video and see exactly what it looks like. Take a little bit on the end of the brush here. Make sure I get both sides of the bristles so it's really embedded, because obviously dry brushing we go both ways. I'm going to take a bit of the excess off just underneath the tile there, and then we're just going to go for it. So we're just going to dry brush this, just going to catch the edges and allow the cork to do the work, really. Just allow the cork to do the work for us. Easy. How quick was that? That was super easy. So don't forget the sides. Sides always get forgotten. I always forget the sides. And then when I get down to like miniature eye level, you know how you do. It looks a bit weird. So that's that one done. Nice and easy. This looks a bit boring though, so I'm going to add a few details to that in a moment. But what we need to do first, we need to dry brush around the outside. Now the grey won't do there, so we're going to need to use a kind of a lighter green, an earthier sort of colour. But in this case, what I think I'll do is I'm actually going to go back in with the original colour, because the dark wash has brought it back. The tone has been darkened by that. So we're going to use this. I might allow a little of that grey to get in there. Go to a smaller brush than this one. So I'll just rinse that quickly. This little brush pack with the blue handles, they're really good. I really enjoy these because they're super cheap and you get loads of different sizes. So just on Amazon. And I'll show you this one if I put all my brushes back up there. I'd like to also say that these are not my nice brushes that go randomly at the top there. But this is a great little brush. So I think Games Workshop do like a little dry brush, which is similar to this. It's just really small. So this is perfect for dry brushing in amongst all of the cracks and crevices in here. So we're going to use this, going to let the grey take the lead because it's a nice thick paint, and then just add that green into there. So you can kind of see how that colour is changing. Add a little bit more into there. Make sure that the whole brush is full. And then obviously you can do this on paper or whatever. I just do it on my desk because I'm lazy. We're going to take most of that off. So you can see initially there's quite a lot coming off, and now there's really not much coming off at all. So we're going to take this. We're just going to go across and see if we can just catch some of the edges here, just to give a bit of highlight. So you can see that in there. Don't worry if it doesn't look perfect, because it's a base. It doesn't matter so much. We're trying to give the impression of tonal variation within there. It's like if you're trying to paint 1/72 scale soldiers. Nobody does the eyes. You just do an impression of an eye by using the shading. So this is all we're doing, just giving an impression of texture underneath there. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. The technique that we're doing here is so easy to replicate, and it can be done so fast and just adds such a lot of variety. Now, to really set this up, we're going to take some of the original highlight colours. This is always the way that I paint. I'll do like a block colour, and then I'll shade it, and then I'll highlight it on top of that. So we use the Vallejo Gunship Green for the pipes. So what I'm going to do really quickly is I'm just going to add a little bit of Vallejo Gunship Green. Take one of my finer brushes, load it up, and then we're just going to run that over the top just to pick those out again. Because if we've dry brushed and we've washed, some of the detail might be lost there. Just going to bring that back out. What you might want to do as well, once that's dried, you can always highlight the ends with a little bit of white in that mix just to pick it out from the rest of the base. But I'm not going to bother with that for the time being. Let's go to the rust here. Give that a bit of a shake. add just a tad. I'm going to take this rust, and we need a fine brush here because obviously our rebar is tucked right in there. So we're just going to pick that out. I can see a water blob on my brush that's going to fall in there any moment, so I'm going to work fairly quickly. Okay, so that's done. We've just picked those out again so it's a little bit more visible. Once again, adding to that variation adds to the story in that base. You know, could have been an airstrike or something that's destroyed the tarmac, and now those Marines or whatever is on top of here walking over the top of that. Okay, so let's take this a step further. You'll notice on this guy here, we've got the road markings. Okay, so the road markings are super easy to do. Once again, using things you can find around the house. Here is a piece of Morrison's fruit and fibre that I've cut out, and you can see I use it as a little, basically as a masking applicator here. You can use masking tape too. Masking tape can be absolutely fine, but I find that once you've got the miniature on the base, so if there's a miniature on this base, it's easier to be able to get this just slid in on the side. So for example, I've got where is it? I'll take this guy. This is from a Blood Bowl commission that I'm working on right now. So this guy here, his base is not finished, but he's already on here. He was supplied to me on the base, and I don't want to rip him off, but I still want to add something interesting onto that base. So what I'm going to do is I'll slide this just onto the base there, and then I'll dry brush through the gap, and that will give me a nice white line. For the Blood Bowl kind of impression, that looks a little bit like this. Okay, so you can see that white line. It's just been dry brushed through the gap. Super easy, but once again, really cheap and almost foolproof. So we're going to do this now. I'm actually going to use a kind of a yellow because I feel as though this needs a bit of colour here. So rather than go for a bright yellow, I'm going to go for this orangey yellow here. This is Bronze Flesh Tone by Vallejo Game Colour. Give that a little bit of a shake up. And we're going to use our small dry brush here. I've just washed it, so you've got to be really careful when you've just washed those brushes so there's no excess moisture. Because as soon as there's excess moisture in there, the dry brushing process is going to fail. So you've got to be really careful with that. Hello, Tim. How you doing? So let's do that. I'm going to take some of that into the brush. Once again, we can wipe off most of this here, so we just have a little bit left. I'm going to pin this down with my fingers. I'm just going to give that a once over here. So just use it in the gap. Simple as that. And there we are. We have our traffic line, or our road line. So this base is super simple. And there are little tiny things that you can add into what I'm sure you already do, just to kind of take it to the next level, just to make it that little bit more interesting. And if you've got a kind of average Space Marine, the focus isn't necessarily the figure itself, so you can afford to do some more detail work on the base. What I might actually do really quickly, because obviously I showed you how to use these. Well, let's do that again quickly. So I'm going to actually take some of that green, if I can get it out. Might have to use my hobby knife. So I'm going to take some of this green. I'm going to add that into here. It's a super light green. All right, this might not work, so who knows? I'll do the practice for you. Add a little bit of black in there. We're going to get our little rubbishy brush again, and we're just going to smush that all up, batter it around, see what we're feeling with it, and then we can add this actually to our base. So let's take this side here. There's no pipes or anything. We're just going to go for it. I'm kind of praying internally that this is going to look all right. We're just going to kind of get a little bit of that underneath there. Yeah, it looks all right. Let's take that a bit further. Take it through the gap there. take it to this side through the pipes. Just add this to the side. And don't be afraid to really rub it in. Okay? Don't be afraid to really rub that into the base so it's really secure. And once again, you can secure it with a varnish. But I thought, given the situation, let's do something different. So now we've got a kind of greenish tinge to this kind of mouldy underfloor situation. What I would suggest you do is actually go in with some gloss varnish here and make it really look like it's swampy underneath the surface of this. You could even add some drips from the underside of these. So James on his stream earlier used Vallejo plastic putty. Mine's just out of reach, I think. Yeah, I'm not going to embarrass myself. So you can actually use that and then use the little applicator just to pull down from the top there. You can do this with gel super glue as well. Gel super glue is really good for that, but it takes a long time. But you can get some really good looking icicles. The Grave Guardian, good question. So I used this earlier. This is just my version of cheap pigments. All right, so these are literally just chalk pastels. You can get these in any hobby shop for super cheap, but they are incredibly versatile. So I like them because obviously we've literally just made our own colours here just because we fancy it. So you can't necessarily do that if you have if you have made pigments. So it's really helpful to be able to have that flexibility. Now, I'm kind of happy with this base. I think that once that's trimmed in black, it's going to look really interesting. The green colour underneath, if we got some gloss on there, that would really look good, I think. What we're going to do now, we're going to finish this with a fine highlight. So the fine highlight is basically going to be a dry brush of near white, just around the edges. See if any, is that dry? Let's get some more. So we're just going to take this right around the edges. And it's just going to pull the tarmac away from the rest of the scene once again. Making sure that my brush is really dry for this. Take a bit of that grey, take a bit of that white. I feel like Bob Ross. Happy little squirrel. So I'm just going to wipe the excess off there. It's not much. And this time when we do our dry brush, we're literally just going to catch the edges here. Just the edges. Just to help it just to kind of pop away from the rest of that green. If you wanted to, you could just add a few little extra bits just around. And you could leave it there if you wanted to. So that tarmac, super simple to do. Looks really good, in my opinion. You might disagree. But I think it looks really good. It's really easy. And you can replicate it on lots of your miniatures really fast. So when I got the Indomitus box, I did the whole lot of these Assault Intercessors with the tarmac bases. And these were... I did the figure on cocktail sticks, so I had all of these bases basically looking like that. So I had the flexibility to really work on each one of them, and then I just stuck the miniature on top. I used my little drill, drilled a little hole, because the Indomitus Marines are all push fit. So instead of push fitting into the base, I just did a little hole into the cork there, and then push fit into there with some super glue. They also have a really weird feel to them that I kind of like. I don't know if it's the cork that gives it just a little bit of springiness, but they just feel like a really nice gaming piece when you move them around. I don't know why. It's just a kind of a side effect, I guess. So that's the second one to do, and obviously it started off looking like this. In the time that we've done talking about that, you can actually see it. This is pretty much dry here. So yeah, it started off looking like that. Now it looks like this. And if you wanted to, you could add even more detail. You add some snow in there. I'm going to show you how to do that in a moment. You can use the pigments. You can add whatever you want in there. And as I said, a bit of gloss varnish in there, make it look really swampy. That's going to look good. All right. So the next thing that I want to show you is a bit more, a little bit more like this guy. So we're gonna add some height to the base. We're gonna give ourselves opportunity to really add focus and to do a bit of storytelling in the base. So in this case, this guy, I've actually written lore for all of my Wolfguard that I've done so far, and it's all on my Instagram, so you can have a look at that if you wanted to. But this guy's Stian Skullbreaker, and he was basically chucked out into the wilds of Fenris as like a feral. You know, in Fenris, you have to go through the trials of Morkai, and they have to kind of deal with the curse of the Wolfen. Well, this guy, he struggles with the curse of the Wolfen very regularly, and he's an absolutely savage warrior. Hence the reason he's carrying the skull, and he's also carrying the Executioner's blade, which I think is super nice. That's also why he's got a big old skull on his base. It's the largest skull that came in the Games Workshop skull pack. I didn't know what on earth to do with it, so I whacked it on the base there. I shaved a little bit off so that his foot sits flush on there as well. And then I had to raise the rest of the base to allow him to actually stand flat, because otherwise, obviously, he'd be at a weird angle. Now, I'll show you how to do the snow here in a minute, but I'm also going to show you how I've built this up and how I kind of created that height in the model. So if you are a tournament player or whatever, it's worth always making a note of the height that the model was, so that when you've put him up onto the height, you can kind of work out a landmark for where the height of the model really would normally be, just to kind of cover your back there. So what we're going to do, we're going to use my favourite stuff again, our tile adhesive. We've actually still got a little bit left here, which is brilliant. I'm going to add a little bit more water into there using our magical pipette. As I said at the beginning, if you don't have pipettes, you need to go and get them as a matter of urgency. They are life-changing, especially if you use an airbrush and you mix in the cup. So it's like a game changer. So we're just going to mix that up again, like so. I'm going to take this, I'm going to put it onto the base straight away. Okay. No messing around here. So just get this straight on the base, and then we need to create the height. So I'm not going to create height just using this tile adhesive, because it'll be clumpy and horrible. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to take some polystyrene here, our favourite stuff as hobbyists. I'm just going to take some of this off like this. I think there's a first there. Managed to break off polystyrene without loads of tiny bits coming off. And we're just going to break off bits until we get to something that we want to work with. So I'm looking at these bits now. I'm looking, okay, which one do I want to use? Which one might be quite cool? I like this one. It's got a bit more weight to it, so I'm just going to work on it a bit more, take a bit more of that off. Here we go. So we've got two flat sides. So I'm going to take one of the flat sides down and leave the other. Because of that, it looks a bit weird, so I'm just going to take the top off. We're just going to shove this on there. Okay. Another great thing about tile adhesive, doesn't splatter around. Look at that. Just going to smash this straight on there. Okay. And the tile adhesive is going to do the job of holding it on. What we're then going to do, just going to secure it with our finger. Just going to push this right up the sides of it, so that it really embeds within the tile adhesive. If you don't like the polystyrene finish, which is totally understandable, you could even cover this in the tile adhesive to cover the bubbly effect. But I actually quite like it, especially if you don't have the whole thing exposed. So for example, we could cover up this side here. Let's go onto the top, add a little bit there. There are no mistakes, in the words of Bob Ross, only happy accidents. So let's just kind of do whatever we got to do here. Let's hide that bit there. Okay, so at the moment it looks pretty rough. Okay, but over time, as that dries, you're going to see that it's going to, very much like with this base here, it's just going to create that height. Now, I've done this just with one chunk of polystyrene, obviously, because it's just a demo. Whereas when I did Stian over here, I had to really think about how I was going to organise that polystyrene, and I even put some layers of cork in there to try and give the idea of layers of rock. But the polystyrene is so good because it just gives the height immediately, and it just gives that gravitas that, someone like a Wolfguard really should have. Murky, I have done tiling. I am okay at tiling. I would not try to claim that I am a good tiler. But it doesn't look awful when I have done it. So what we can also do here is we can add some more interest and flavour to this little base here. All right. So we're going to add some cork. We can put that in there. Perhaps put that down the side there. I'm going to embed that into the tile adhesive. Look. Pop that in there. Nice. Now, as I said before, I have used the cork to make ice. So if you were to paint it white and then use a blue wash over the top, the blue will sit into the cracks, and it does give a really good impression of ice. Unfortunately, I don't have anyone to show you, but I did it on a commission job for Obsec Tactics, who's a friend here in Norwich. He's got a YouTube channel for wargaming. He does 40k battle reports and stuff. I would urge you to go and check him out. He's totally undersubscribed, and the quality of the videos is so good. But anyway, I did some rebasing for his Tyrannid army. And his warriors, I put on a plank of this cork, and then I painted it in that ice, and then covered bits in snow. It looks really, really good. The Brood Lord, for example, I had obviously the bit that it's modelled standing on. That I've modelled breaking out of the ice, so I used the cork to kind of lean up against it to make it look like it had broken through the ice, and then obviously covered the side bits with snow. Those images are all on my Instagram. You have to scroll down quite a bit now. It was late last year, I think. But definitely some ideas for you, including, of course, the winged hive tyrant that was on a little platform that I made with polystyrene and pieces of matchstick and stuff like that, with the guardsman underneath. Well worth looking at if you haven't seen it already. So let's just get those out of the way. Forgive me, I'm going to get my little hoover. Bloody brilliant, that thing. Especially if you're making an absolute mess like I do. Alright, so once again, Blue Peter moment. Here's one I made earlier. So we've allowed this to dry. What I've done is I have sprayed it in total with the Vallejo Grey. And then I have sprayed, you could do this with a paintbrush, but I've sprayed a mixture of Vallejo Dark Brown and that Vallejo Grey together, just to blend it into that environment there. Okay, now you can see that some of the tile adhesives have just started to kind of chip away there. Don't worry about it. Okay, when I first started, I thought, oh, okay, I'm gonna have to find something else to use. Do not worry about it. Once you've dry brushed it, you've painted it, you've done whatever you need to do with it, it'll be absolutely fine. And once you've sealed it as well, it's added protection, so don't worry about that. Right, so what we're going to do, we are going to dry brush this rock, just to give the impression of rock there. I'm going to cover this in snow for you so you can see how I do that. So we don't need to go crazy with our dry brushing. It doesn't have to be absolutely spot on perfect. Now, it's for the dry brush, because it's a dark grey, I'm going to need a little bit of black here. So I'm using the Vallejo Game Colour Black, because it's quite nice and thick. So that's going to help us. Just move that into the centre of the camera for you. So we're going to go into our, let's go to this white here, because as it's drying, it's becoming a really good source. There we go. It's almost perfect for dry brushing because it's a little bit matted. Now notice how quickly the darker pigment influences the white one. It's crazy. Sorry, I'm just checking the comments there. Chirp up if I've missed anything. I do keep trying to see if there have been any extra comments, but I might have missed it. So this kind of dry brushing situation, we can be fairly liberal with it. The only thing you have to worry about is if you're too aggressive with the polystyrene, the little balls will come out. So obviously it hasn't been varnished yet. So will have a tendency to fragment. We're just going to take this once again all the way through there. I'm going to take this all the way round to the other side. Just okay. So before we get to the brown, I'm actually going to do the fine highlighting of the rock. I'd encourage you to try to start doing fine highlighting, because it's basically just going back to where you've originally highlighted, whether that's manually with a brush on like your top level miniatures, or whether that is just dry brushing, because it just adds that extra little bit of something, especially on the edges. It's like edge highlighting, but for your scenery. So look at how that's working now. Let's see if I can focus that on that. I don't know if you can see that. I might have to force the camera to refocus. There we go. No, focus on it. You can just see at the top here that we're catching the very, very top of that lighter colour. The edges here, I'm going to do there. So you can see we've really brought out the detail. And the polystyrene, it does not look bad. Right, we're going to cover this with snow anyway, so that is, that's more than good enough for our purposes. All right, we need to do the earth. I'm not going to wash my brush here, because as soon as I wash this brush, there's going to be a ton of moisture in there, and our dry brushing is going to be a right pain. So what I'm going to do, just thinking of my colours here. So I keep my colours arranged. I'll just show you so you can kind of see. There we go. So I keep my colours arranged pretty much in colour order, regardless of viscosity. So it just allows me to see at a glance where they need to go. So looking at our brown, we need a lighter brown. So I'm going to go with Game Colour Earth here, because I think that's going to be quite nice, especially if we add in just a little touch of black or something. So I'm just going to re-center that down for you so you can see a bit more of what I'm doing. So let's go to this brown. And we'll just mix some of that in. It doesn't matter if it gets a bit dark. It really doesn't matter. I'm actually deliberately now mixing it with that darker grey so it gets a bit grubby. Just going to kind of see what it looks like on here. So that's picking out the things that we want it to pick out, which is really nice. And it's quite subtle, which is really good too. A lot of people with their dry brushing, they go for almost pure white, regardless of the colour that they're dry brushing over. Dry brushing is a really, really useful tool, but it is also something you still have to consider. So there we go. We've got our basic rocky base here. You can see a hero standing on the top there already. I can see it in my mind's eye. So let's do the bit that I get millions of questions about. I'm going to put some snow on here. Okay. Now you will, I'm sure, have Googled and YouTubed how to do snow. So you will probably know my technique, but I have a small tweak that makes it really nice, in my opinion. Let's just move that out of the way. Okay. So I'm going to take a little cup here, and we need 3 ingredients basically. We need sodium bicarbonate. This is the size of sodium bicarbonate tub that a Space Wolves collector has. It was full when I got it, and now it's like half full. So I have used quite a considerable amount of it. Now you need equal parts sodium bicarbonate, white PVA glue, and a white acrylic paint. So I'm just going to grab my white acrylic paint, because I don't want to use my really nice stuff. So my expensive Vallejo paint is going to be wasted here. So I've just got some super cheap stuff that I grabbed from Hobbycraft or some other cheap kind of hobby place. Give it a good shake. And there is no kind of, there's no one trick shot to this. You just have to kind of mix it to see how it goes, really. And then by doing that, you'll learn by trial and error. However, hopefully you will see what I want to do here. Sorry, my white has kind of attacked me, so I'm just going to wipe that off my thumb so I don't put it onto my miniatures. So let's take that little bit. Collateral damage. There we go. Let's take that. So we're just going to go for it, put a decent amount on there. Okay. I always make too much, but because I've got a massive tub of sodium bicarbonate, I don't really care. It doesn't last very long. It does wash away nicely, so you can wash it down a sink or whatever. It's not going to be a big problem, because essentially you're just watering down the PVA glue when you wash it out. So let's take the PVA glue. Now add that in there, so we've got kind of equal parts roughly. Doesn't have to be perfect. It's quite a foolproof strategy. And now we're going to take our sodium bicarbonate, and we're just going to add some into there. So I was going to get a spoon to do this, but I forgot to do that. So I'm just going to use my fingers. I'm just going to put it on the top there. So when you're applying this, you don't want to be using a tool like this. You want to be using an older brush. So the older brush is going to allow you to kind of really manipulate the substance. So I've got an older brush here. This is a cheap one that I used to use. And I'm just going to mix it up. Yeah, rest assured that it will come out of your brush. It's not going to destroy your brush entirely. I'm just going to mix that up there until it's a nice kind of goopy consistency. So this here, it's kind of like it's kind of like when you look at meringue. It's not quite holding the stiff peaks there. So I'm just going to add a little bit more bicarb there, just a tad. I'm going to go back in there, just going to mix this in, just to see how it's doing. It looks like it's kind of, I don't know if you can see, but it's kind of holding itself a little bit better now. Let's take a bit of that excess from elsewhere, build it all in. Right, I'm going to put a tiny bit more there just to be safe. Like, there's no exact science to this really. As long as it feels right, it seems like it's something that you can kind of spread, but at the same time is going to hold itself. And that's all you need. That's all you want. So this here, I'm going to take this, and we're going to catch all the raised edges. Okay, so I'm just going to see if I can force the camera to focus on this. Okay, so I'm going to start at the top. I'm just going to bob it around. I'm going to put fairly large lumps on, and then once you've got the lump that's on there, you can kind of drag it across so it just catches the other areas. Now if you are painting miniatures that are in a snowy environment, this is such an easy way to do it. And I know that it's fairly well known, this mixture, but I'm going to do something in just a second that I think just gives it an extra little touch. So we're not going to go crazy at the basics. Of course, the snow, when it falls, it's going to catch the top of this, and then it's going to have a gap at the bottom there. All right. If you wanted to, you could go in with some gloss varnish, just to give the illusion that it's melted, and therefore you've got kind of a wetness there. This side looks like it's more open to the elements, so I'm going to kind of give that a bit of care. Okay. You want to do this, I'm not pressing hard, I'm letting the mixture decide where it's going to go. Okay. And then any of those kind of raised edges that are caught, then that's spot on. Okay, so this is where a lot of people leave it. Okay, but this is the final piece to resistance, and it's so simple. We're going to take some of the sodium bicarb, and we are just going to sprinkle it onto the top, just like this. This is a bit that I never tell anyone because I think it looks amazing, and I don't want everyone else to steal it. But I'm over that. I'd love to see more miniatures looking like this. So I'm just going to tap that off. Okay, so giving it a bit of a tap there. It's a bit messy, I'm afraid. I've got my Uber, so don't worry. So this here is our finished snowy base. Let me move that out of the way there. Might be able to put that behind it. Might help you to see it a bit better. So this snowy base is so simple, and adding the final flourish I think makes a massive difference. I actually look at my Space Wolves in the cabinet, and when the light is in the right place, the snow twinkles like it would do in real life, because you've got the tiny little particles of the sodium bicarb that just catch the light in a fairly natural way. So it is a really easy way to do your snow bases, and I would thoroughly encourage you to do it. So what we've done today is we've looked at Martian bases. We've looked at the way that you can use cheap pigments by scraping off like hobby chalk pastels, etc. We've demonstrated the urban bases. Right, this one we went for that weird greenish colour at the bottom, and then we used our cardboard mask to do our road line, adding a little bit of extra interest. We've also picked out the finer details. Don't forget that in real life, when you have a broken road surface, it's not just going to be a bit of tarmac and mud. There's going to be pipes running underneath it. If it's a fallen wall, there's probably going to be rebar and stuff within the rubble. So remember that and put it in there because it adds a little bit of interest. Finally, we've done the same process as the urban base, using that tile adhesive as the main foundation. And then we've built on that using the polystyrene, using our cork, and then we have, I've painted it, I've sprayed it, dry brushed it. Remember to fine highlight your dry brush as well. So you can see on here, we've got the outside is a bit whiter. And then we used the classic snow recipe. So our equal parts PVA, sodium bicarb, and white acrylic. And then applied it using that brush fairly liberally on the top surfaces. Once we've done that, we have then put the sodium bicarb over the top. So the dry sodium bicarb has been kind of just sprinkled over the top to give it that final sort of flourish. So that is everything that I wanted to go through for you guys today. I'd love to hear your feedback, because I'm thinking about starting a small YouTube channel as a kind of avenue off the main Instagram account. Not for anything but kind of 10-minute tutorials. So obviously this was longer for HobbyFest, but I would really take these and do them in 10 minutes and edit the footage so it's really quick and sharp. So I'd be really interested to hear whether you found what I've been doing useful, and whether that would be something that was interesting for you. Please don't forget to go over to my Instagram as well and drop me a follow. Have a look at some of the models that I mentioned. Maybe it will give you some ideas for your own bases. And also, please go back to the HobbyFest21 homepage and have a little look and see if there's anything else that tickles your fancy. But I'm going to hang around here for the next sort of 5 minutes or so. And if you've got any questions or anything you want to talk about, then please do drop it into the comments. Thanks, Oni Barkos. That's really good. Pleased to hear it. Also, if anyone's interested, I just I bought off Amazon. So I follow a guy called Brushing Dan. I don't know if he's joined the. I don't know if he's in the audience. No, but Brushing Dan is he is way underfollowed on Instagram. I would argue that he's probably one of the best painters that I follow on Instagram. He's honestly amazing, and he did. He's done a few models and put them into glass spell jars, and they look so good. And I thought, well, I'm going to give it a try. And they just arrived today. I'm going to do like a scene with Gandalf on. I'm going to sell it on my Etsy store. But the bell jar itself, I've just put Legolas and Gimli in there for the sake of it. But this here, I got 5 of these little bell jars for £5. I had to wait a month for them to be transported from China, but I mean, this is amazing. I think you'll agree. Like, if you actually spent time making like a scene in there and put your model in there, if you've got a real character that you love, I mean, that's worth its weight in gold. I think these bell jars. It's literally just come out of the package, so I haven't cleaned it. I just whacked these guys in there just for the sake of showing you. But you should definitely go over to Brushing Dan on Instagram and check him out, because he uses little acrylic cases, and he has used his bell jars to kind of present his miniatures, and they look amazing. Honestly, they look so good, and I just couldn't help myself. So these just arrived today, but I wanted to show you in case it kind of gives you any more inspiration or any other ideas that you might think to use. So they're super simple. You just take the top off, take my little miniatures out. I don't know. I haven't tried Stian's Skullbreaker in here yet. He might not fit. Or he fits. There we go. Spot on. So Stian's in his little bubble. Thank you so much for all of the comments, guys. It's really good to hear. Obviously, as you can imagine, you're a little bit nervous before you go live on something like this. Yeah, I don't do it very often, but I'm a teacher full time, so I should be confident. But you know, it's still new, so I'm really pleased that you guys found those tips helpful. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of the HobbyFest this year. I've been enjoying it. I think it's been really fun. And James was saying in his that they're going to do another one later this year. So hopefully I'll be able to do that again, and maybe I'll share some more tips. Hi, Lex. Happy birthday. Everyone say happy birthday to Lex. So I'm going to turn off the live, and you guys can go off to the next HobbyFest scheduled appointment. I can't remember exactly what that is off the top of my head, but if you go to the HobbyFest Instagram page, you will then find in the story the schedules for the weekend. So I'm looking forward to dropping in and out of some more of the really good material stuff that's going on. Thank you very much, Tim. When I come to make your nostalgic ultramarine, I'll use all of these tips for you. All right, guys, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.